Sarah Martinez stepped off the military transport bus at Fort Bragg, her boots hitting the dusty ground with a soft thud. At 22 years old, she looked like any other fresh recruit arriving for their first assignment. Her uniform was crisp and new, her hair pulled back in a regulation bun, and her eyes held that mixture of excitement and nervousness that marked someone just beginning their military career. The other soldiers getting off the bus were mostly men, and they towered over Sarah's petite 5'4" frame. She grabbed her duffel bag and followed the group toward the processing center, trying to look confident even though her heart was pounding. This wasn't her first time in the military, but it was her first time at this particular base, and she knew that first impressions mattered. Sergeant Thompson, a gruff man in his 40s with arms like tree trunks, stood waiting for the new arrivals. His eyes scanned the group before settling on Sarah. "You must be Martinez," he said, checking his clipboard. "You're assigned to Alpha Company, 2nd Battalion." Sarah nodded and saluted. "Yes, Sergeant." Thompson looked her up and down, taking in her youthful appearance and slight build. "How old are you, soldier?" 22, Sergeant. "And this is your first deployment?" Sarah hesitated for just a moment. "No, Sergeant. I've served before." Thompson raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. He handed her a set of papers and pointed toward a building across the courtyard. "Get your gear sorted and report to your unit commander in 1 hour. Welcome to Fort Bragg." As Sarah walked across the base, she couldn't help but notice the stares she was getting from other soldiers. Some looked curious, others seemed dismissive. She was used to it by now. In the military, especially in combat units, being a young woman meant constantly proving yourself. People made assumptions based on appearance, and Sarah had learned long ago that sometimes it was better to let them think what they wanted to think. Her new barracks were clean, but basic. She was assigned a bottom bunk in a room she'd share with 3 other soldiers. As she unpacked her belongings, her roommates trickled in. First was Private Johnson, a tall guy from Texas who seemed friendly enough. Then came Corporal Williams, a woman about Sarah's age who had been at the base for 6 months. Last was Private First Class Chen, a quiet guy who nodded politely but didn't say much. "So where are you coming from?" Williams asked as she helped Sarah make her bed. "Last assignment was overseas," Sarah replied simply. "Oh, cool. Which base?" Sarah paused, folding a t-shirt carefully. It was a forward operating base. Pretty remote. Williams seemed to sense that Sarah didn't want to elaborate, so she changed the subject. "Well, you'll like it here. The food's not terrible, and Sergeant Thompson is tough but fair. Just don't let him intimidate you." Sarah smiled. "I'll keep that in mind." That evening, Sarah joined her new unit for dinner in the mess hall. The conversation was typical military banter. Complaints about training exercises, jokes about officers, and speculation about upcoming deployments. Sarah listened more than she spoke, getting a feel for the group dynamics. "So Martinez," said Specialist Rodriguez, a stocky guy with a thick Brooklyn accent, "what's your story? You look like you just graduated high school." Several soldiers at the table chuckled, and Sarah felt all eyes on her. This was the moment she'd been dreading. In her previous assignments, word about her background had usually spread quickly through unofficial channels. Here she was starting fresh, and she wasn't sure she wanted to reveal everything right away. "I enlisted when I was 18, she said, taking a bite of her food. "Been in for about 4 years now." 4 years? Johnson looked surprised. "You must have been deployed pretty quick then." Sarah nodded. "Yeah, they needed people with my particular skills." "What skills?" Rodriguez pressed. Sarah looked around the table at the expectant faces. These would be her teammates, possibly for years. She needed their respect and trust, but she also knew that sometimes her background made people treat her differently. Some became overly protective, others resentful, and a few seemed to think her achievements were somehow diminished because of her age and gender. "I'm a combat medic," she said finally. "Did multiple tours in Afghanistan." The table went quiet for a moment. Combat medics were highly respected in the military, especially those who had served in active war zones. Williams looked impressed. "That's pretty intense," Chen said quietly. "How many tours?" Sarah hesitated again. 3 tours. 15 months total in country. What she didn't mention was that those 15 months had been some of the most intense combat operations of the entire Afghanistan conflict. She didn't talk about the countless wounded soldiers she had treated under fire, or the times she had charged into active combat zones to reach fallen comrades. She certainly didn't mention the 5 separate incidents that had earned her the Purple Heart. the military decoration given to those wounded in combat. As the conversation moved on to other topics, Sarah felt a familiar mix of relief and frustration. She was grateful that her new unit seemed to accept her based on her role as a medic, but she also felt the weight of the secrets she carried. The scars hidden under her uniform told stories that would shock these soldiers who saw her as just another rookie. Later that night, as she lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling, Sarah thought about the long journey that had brought her here. Most people her age were worried about college exams or entry-level jobs. She had already seen more combat than soldiers with twice her experience, had saved lives under impossible circumstances, and had paid a physical and emotional price that most people could never understand. But tomorrow would bring new challenges, new missions, and new opportunities to prove herself all over again. She closed her eyes and tried to push away the memories that always came flooding back in quiet moments like these. The sound of helicopter rotors, the smell of smoke and dust, the weight of a wounded soldier in her arms as she dragged them to safety. For now, she was just Martinez, the new medic who looked like a rookie. And maybe for a little while that was exactly what she needed to be. 3 weeks into her assignment at Fort Bragg, Sarah had settled into a comfortable routine. Morning PT, medical training sessions, equipment maintenance, and evening briefings filled her days. Her unit had accepted her as their medic, though she could still feel some of them watching her, waiting to see how she would perform when things got serious. That test came sooner than expected. The alarm sounded at 0400 hours on a Tuesday morning, jolting everyone awake. Emergency deployment. Sergeant Thompson's voice boomed through the barracks. Gear up and report to the briefing room in 15 minutes. Sarah rolled out of her bunk and quickly pulled on her uniform. Her medical kit was always packed and ready, a habit formed during her combat tours where seconds could mean the difference between life and death. Around her, the other soldiers moved with practiced efficiency, but she could sense their nervous energy. In the briefing room, Captain Rivera, their commanding officer, stood in front of a large map. We have a situation in the mountains about 200 miles north of here. A training exercise went wrong and we have multiple casualties. Weather conditions are preventing helicopter evacuation, so we're going in by ground to provide medical support and extract the wounded. Sarah's pulse quickened. This was exactly the kind of mission where her experience would matter. But she also knew her unit had no idea what she was truly capable of. Martinez, Captain Rivera called out, "You'll be primary medic on this mission. How much gear can you carry?" "Whatever's needed, sir," Sarah replied without hesitation. Specialist Rodriguez leaned over and whispered, "Don't be a hero, rookie." "This isn't training," Sarah bit back her response. If Rodriguez only knew the missions she had already completed, he would understand that this was actually one of the less dangerous situations she had faced. The convoy left the base an hour later. Sarah rode in the lead vehicle with Sergeant Thompson, Captain Rivera, and 3 other soldiers. The mood was tense as they wound their way through mountain roads that grew increasingly treacherous. Snow had started to fall, making visibility poor and the road slippery. "How you holding up, Martinez?" Thompson asked as they navigated a particularly sharp turn. "Fine, Sergeant. Just focused on the mission." Thompson studied her face in the dim light. Something about her calm demeanor seemed familiar, though he couldn't place why. Most new medics showed at least some signs of nervousness before their first real emergency call. Sarah looked like she was heading to a routine training exercise. After 4 hours of driving, they reached the accident site. What they found was chaos. A military truck had skidded off the icy road and rolled down a steep embankment. Several soldiers were trapped inside, while others lay scattered around the wreckage. The local medical team was overwhelmed and had been waiting for backup. Captain Rivera quickly assessed the situation. "Martinez, get down there and triage the wounded. Rodriguez, Williams, you're with her. Everyone else, help with the extraction." Sarah grabbed her medical kit and began making her way down the embankment. The slope was steep and covered in loose rocks and snow. She moved carefully but quickly, her eyes already assessing the casualties below. The first wounded soldier she reached was conscious but had an obvious broken leg.
"Hey there," she said in a calm voice.
"I'm Sarah, and I'm going to take care of you." "What's your name?" "Thompson. Private Thompson, ma'am." "Not related to the sergeant," the young soldier said through gritted teeth. Sarah smiled as she began examining his leg. "Well, Private Thompson, you're going to be fine. This is a clean break and we'll have you fixed up in no time." As she worked, Rodriguez and Williams watched in amazement. Sarah's hands moved with incredible precision and confidence. She splinted the broken leg, started an IV line, and administered pain medication, all while keeping up a steady stream of reassuring conversation with the patient. "Where did you learn to do that so fast?" Williams whispered. Sarah glanced up. "You pick things up. Rodriguez, I need you to help me move him to stable ground. Williams, check on that soldier by the truck." What her teammates didn't realize was that Sarah had performed this exact sequence of actions dozens of times under much more difficult circumstances. She had treated wounded soldiers while under enemy fire, in the middle of sandstorms, and in makeshift field hospitals with minimal supplies. This mountain rescue, while challenging, felt almost routine to her. The next patient was more serious. A sergeant from the training unit had severe internal injuries and was going into shock. Sarah immediately recognized the signs and began working to stabilize him. "This one needs surgery," she called out to the other medics. "We need to get him to a hospital immediately." "The roads are too dangerous for an ambulance," one of the local medics replied. "Helicopter can't fly in this weather." Sarah looked at the patient, then at the treacherous mountain road above them. She made a quick calculation in her head. "We can get him stable enough for transport if we work fast. I need plasma, morphine, and pressure bandages." For the next hour, Sarah worked with focused intensity. She managed to stabilize 3 critical patients and treat several others with less serious injuries. Her unit watched in growing amazement as she moved from patient to patient with the efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. "How is she so calm?" Johnson whispered to Rodriguez. Rodriguez shook his head. "I don't know, man. I've seen experienced medics who aren't this smooth." As they prepared to transport the wounded soldiers back to the base, Sergeant Thompson pulled Sarah aside. "Good work down there, Martinez. That was some impressive medical work." "Thank you, Sergeant." Thompson studied her face again. "You know, I've been in the Army for 22 years. I've seen a lot of medics in action. What you did today, that wasn't beginner's work." Sarah met his eyes steadily. "I try to learn from every situation, Sergeant." "That's not what I mean, and you know it." Thompson's voice was quiet but serious. "Where exactly did you serve before this assignment?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. She could feel the weight of her unit's attention, though they were pretending to focus on loading equipment. This was the moment she had been avoiding since her arrival. "Forward Operating Base Chapman, Afghanistan," she said finally. "Also Fob Shank and Fob Warrior." Thompson's eyes widened. Those were some of the most dangerous bases in Afghanistan, located in areas that saw constant combat. "How long were you at Chapman?" 7 months. 7 months. Thompson whistled low. "That was during the worst of the fighting in that sector." Sarah nodded but didn't elaborate. She climbed into the truck and settled in for the long ride back to base, knowing that her secret was starting to unravel. Soon her unit would learn that their rookie medic had more combat experience than most soldiers twice her age. Word about Sarah's performance during the mountain rescue spread quickly through the base. Within days, soldiers who had never spoken to her before were nodding respectfully when they passed her in the corridors. Her own unit looked at her with new eyes, and she could sense them trying to piece together the puzzle of who she really was. The questions started small. During dinner conversation, someone would casually ask about her previous assignments. During training exercises, instructors would comment on her advanced techniques. Each time, Sarah gave vague but truthful answers, never quite revealing the full scope of her experience. Corporal Williams was the most persistent. As her roommate, she had more opportunities to observe Sarah's habits and mannerisms. She noticed how Sarah's eyes would scan any room she entered, automatically identifying exits and potential threats. She saw how Sarah would instinctively duck at loud noises that didn't bother anyone else. Most telling of all, she observed Sarah's reaction during a movie night when someone put on a war film. "You okay?" Williams had whispered when Sarah abruptly left the room during a particularly intense combat scene. "Just tired," Sarah had replied. But Williams noticed her hands were shaking slightly. The breakthrough came during a routine medical training exercise. Captain Rivera had organized a realistic trauma simulation to test the unit's emergency response capabilities. Fake casualties with elaborate makeup and special effects were scattered around a mock battlefield, complete with smoke machines and sound effects of gunfire and explosions. Sarah approached the exercise with her usual calm professionalism, but something was different. As the simulated battle sounds grew louder and the smoke thicker, she seemed to transform. Her movements became faster, more urgent and incredibly precise. She treated the fake casualties with an intensity that went beyond acting, calling out medical terminology and procedures that were far beyond the basic training level. "I need a chest tube kit," she shouted over the noise, working on a mannequin with simulated chest trauma, "and get me 2 units of O-negative blood." The exercise controller, an experienced medical instructor, stopped the simulation. "Martinez, where did you learn that procedure?" Sarah looked up, suddenly aware that everyone was staring at her. The smoke was still drifting around them, and for a moment she seemed disoriented, as if she was seeing something the others couldn't see. It was in the manual," she said weakly. "No, it wasn't," the instructor replied. "That's an advanced surgical technique that most field medics never learn. I've only seen it performed in Level 1 trauma centers." Sergeant Thompson, who had been watching the exercise from the sidelines, stepped forward. "All right, everyone take 15 minutes. Martinez, I need to see you in my office." Sarah's heart sank as she followed Thompson across the training field. She knew this conversation had been coming since the mountain rescue, but she wasn't sure she was ready for it. Thompson's office was small and cluttered with paperwork, training manuals and photos from his various deployments. He gestured for Sarah to sit down, then spent a long moment studying her personnel file. "According to this," he said finally, "you enlisted at 18, completed basic training and medical school, and were deployed to Afghanistan for 3 tours totaling 15 months. That timeline puts you in some very specific places at very specific times." Sarah remained silent, her hands folded in her lap. "I made some calls," Thompson continued. "Talked to some people I know who served at Chapman and the other bases you mentioned. Want to know what I found out?" Sarah's stomach clenched, but she kept her expression neutral. "I found out that there was a medic at FOB Chapman who became something of a legend. Young woman, barely out of training, who ran into active combat zones to treat wounded soldiers. They called her Angel because she seemed to appear out of nowhere whenever someone was hurt." Thompson leaned forward in his chair. "This medic was involved in some of the heaviest fighting of the entire war. She was wounded multiple times but kept working, saved dozens of lives under impossible circumstances. The stories about her, well, they're the kind of things people talk about for years afterward." Sarah's throat felt tight, but she managed to keep her voice steady. "Sounds like an impressive soldier." "Yeah, she was. Problem is, according to the official records I can access, this medic's name was classified. Something about protecting her identity for security reasons." Thompson's eyes never left Sarah's face. "But the physical description matches someone sitting in my office right now." The silence stretched between them for what felt like hours. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat and the distant sounds of soldiers training outside. She had always known this moment would come eventually. The military was too small a community to keep secrets forever. "Why didn't you tell us?" Thompson asked, his voice gentler now. Sarah took a deep breath. "Because I wanted to be treated like everyone else. I'm tired of people looking at me like I'm some kind of, I don't know, like I'm different." "You are different," Thompson said. "That's not necessarily a bad thing." "Yes, it is." Sarah's voice was quiet but firm. "People hear about my record and suddenly they either want to put me on a pedestal or they think I'm some kind of damaged goods. They start walking on eggshells around me, or they expect me to be superhuman all the time. I just wanted to be a normal soldier for once." Thompson nodded slowly. He had seen what combat could do to young soldiers, especially those who had seen as much action as Sarah apparently had. "What happened over there, Martinez? And I mean really happened, not the sanitized version in your file." Sarah was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I did my job. That's all. When soldiers got hurt, I treated them. When they were in danger, I got them out. Sometimes that meant going places I probably shouldn't have gone, but..." She shrugged. "That's what medics do." "How many times were you wounded?" Sarah's jaw tightened. This was the question she had been dreading most. That's not really important." "It is to me. It is to your unit. These people need to know who they're serving with." Sarah met his eyes for the first time since entering the office. "5 times, Sergeant." "I was wounded 5 times. Thompson felt a chill run down his spine. 5 combat wounds meant 5 Purple Hearts, one of the military's highest honors. It also meant Sarah had endured more trauma than most soldiers experienced in entire careers. "Martinez," he said carefully, I think it's time your unit knew who you really are." The unit meeting was called for the next morning. Sarah sat in the back row of the briefing room, watching as her fellow soldiers filed in with curious expressions. Most assumed it was a routine training update or mission briefing. Only Sarah and Sergeant Thompson knew that everything was about to change. Captain Rivera entered the room carrying a thick folder and a small wooden box. His expression was serious as he moved to the front of the room. "Before we begin today's briefing, there's something important you all need to know about one of your teammates." Sarah felt every muscle in her body tense. She had barely slept the night before, replaying this moment in her mind. Part of her was relieved that the secret was finally coming out, but another part dreaded the way her fellow soldiers would look at her afterward. "Specialist Martinez," Captain Rivera called out. "Would you please come forward?" Sarah stood on shaky legs and walked to the front of the room. She could feel everyone's eyes on her, could hear the whispered questions starting among her unit mates. Williams looked confused, Rodriguez seemed concerned, and Chen watched with his usual quiet intensity. Captain Rivera opened the folder and began reading. Sarah Elena Martinez, born in El Paso, Texas. Enlisted in the United States Army at age 18 as a combat medic. Completed advanced medical training at Fort Sam Houston with highest honors. So far, nothing Sarah's unit hadn't already known or suspected. But Captain Rivera continued reading. First deployment, Forward Operating Base Chapman, Afghanistan, December 2020 to July 2021. During this deployment, Specialist Martinez was involved in 37 combat operations and treated over 200 wounded soldiers under hostile fire. The room had gone completely silent. Even the rustling of papers and shifting in chairs had stopped. On January 15, 2021, while treating wounded soldiers during a Taliban attack on Chapman, Specialist Martinez was struck by shrapnel from a mortar round. Despite her injuries, she continued treating patients for 4 more hours until the attack was repelled. Captain Rivera paused and looked at Sarah, who stood at attention with her eyes fixed on a point somewhere above her fellow soldiers' heads. This action earned Specialist Martinez her first Purple Heart. Rodriguez leaned forward in his chair, his mouth slightly open. He had been making jokes about Sarah being a rookie for weeks. Second deployment, Fob Shank, August 2021 to February 2022. During a convoy ambush on October 3, 2021, Specialist Martinez left the safety of her armored vehicle to treat wounded soldiers in an open area, while under direct enemy fire. She was shot twice in the left shoulder but continued working. Williams put her hand over her mouth. She thought about all the times she had seen Sarah favor her left shoulder during physical training, how she sometimes winced when lifting heavy equipment. Second Purple Heart. Captain Rivera continued. Third deployment, Fob Warrior, April 2022 to November 2022. On June 20, 2022, Specialist Martinez single-handedly evacuated 12 wounded soldiers from a helicopter crash site while the area was under rocket attack. She sustained multiple injuries from flying debris and burns from aviation fuel. Captain Rivera's voice had grown softer, more reverent. Third Purple Heart. The room was so quiet that Sarah could hear the air conditioning humming overhead. She risked a glance at her unit and saw faces filled with shock, respect, and something that might have been awe. On September 8, 2022, during her final deployment, Specialist Martinez was part of a patrol that was ambushed in a narrow mountain pass. When the unit's medic was killed in the initial attack, Martinez took over medical duties for the entire patrol while under heavy fire. She was wounded by grenade fragments but continued to treat casualties for 8 hours until reinforcements arrived. Fourth Purple Heart. Thompson, who had heard parts of this story during his research, felt his chest tighten. He couldn't imagine the courage it had taken for someone Sarah's age to endure what she had experienced. The fifth and final injury occurred on October 15, 2022. During the evacuation from Fob Warrior, Specialist Martinez was helping to load wounded soldiers onto a transport helicopter when the landing zone came under attack. She was struck by a sniper's bullet while shielding a wounded soldier with her own body. Captain Rivera closed the folder and picked up the wooden box. Fifth Purple Heart. He opened the box, revealing 5 identical medals, purple hearts with gold edges, each representing a moment when Sarah had been wounded while serving her country. The sight of them made several soldiers in the room shift uncomfortably. In addition to her 5 Purple Hearts, Captain Rivera continued, Specialist Martinez has been awarded the Combat Medical Badge, The Bronze Star with Valor Device, the Army Commendation Medal with Valor Device, and the Afghanistan Campaign Medal with 4 campaign stars. Sarah had never heard her entire record read aloud like this. Hearing it spoken in Captain Rivera's formal tone made her own experiences seem unreal, like he was talking about someone else entirely. "The reason you're hearing this now," Rivera said, addressing the room, "is because Specialist Martinez specifically requested that her background remain confidential when she arrived at this unit. She wanted to be treated like any other soldier, without the assumptions and expectations that often come with a combat record like hers." He turned to look at Sarah directly. "However, recent events have made it clear that her exceptional skills and experience are too valuable to keep hidden. This unit is stronger because of her presence, and you all deserve to know who you're serving alongside." Rodriguez slowly stood up and began clapping. One by one, the rest of the unit joined him until the entire room was filled with applause. Sarah's eyes filled with tears that she fought to hold back. When the applause died down, Johnson raised his hand. "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. "Why didn't you want us to know? I mean, if I had a record like that, I'd probably have it tattooed on my forehead." A few soldiers chuckled, and Sarah felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. "Because," she said, finding her voice, "I've spent the last 2 years being defined by what happened to me over there. People either treat me like I'm made of glass or they expect me to be some kind of superhero. I just wanted to be part of a team again, not the person everyone walks on eggshells around." William stood up next. "Well, for what it's worth, I think you're an amazing roommate. Purple Hearts or no Purple Hearts. Though it does explain why you're so neat. I guess military hospitals don't tolerate messy medics." The room erupted in laughter, and Sarah felt a weight she had been carrying for months finally begin to lift from her shoulders. Sergeant Thompson stepped forward. "All right, everyone, show's over. We still have a mission to prepare for. But first, I think we owe Specialist Martinez a proper welcome to the unit." As her fellow soldiers gathered around to shake her hand and ask questions, Sarah realized that her worst fears hadn't come true. They weren't treating her like a fragile hero or an untouchable legend. They were treating her like exactly what she had always wanted to be. One of them. The weeks following the revelation about Sarah's background brought unexpected changes to the unit's dynamics. Rather than the awkwardness she had feared, Sarah found that her fellow soldiers treated her with a comfortable respect that felt more genuine than anything she had experienced since returning from Afghanistan. Rodriguez, who had been the most skeptical about her abilities, became one of her strongest supporters. "I kept thinking there was something different about you," he told her one evening as they cleaned their weapons together. "You moved like someone who had been in real combat, but I figured I was just imagining things." The change was most noticeable during training exercises, where before Sarah had held back trying not to appear too advanced. She now felt free to use her full range of skills. When newer recruits arrived at the base, she naturally took on a mentoring role, teaching them survival techniques and medical procedures that couldn't be learned from textbooks. But the adjustment wasn't without its challenges. Sarah noticed that some soldiers from other units treated her differently now. A few seemed intimidated by her record, while others appeared to view her as some kind of celebrity. She occasionally caught groups of soldiers pointing and whispering when she walked by, and she could usually guess what they were discussing. The most difficult moment came during a base-wide training exercise when a young private approached her during a break. "Excuse me, Specialist Martinez?" he said nervously. "I heard about what you did in Afghanistan. My brother was at Fob Chapman during some of the fighting. He might have been one of the soldiers you treated." Sarah felt her chest tighten. These conversations always made her uncomfortable, because she never knew what to say. How do you respond to someone who might be thanking you for saving their family member's life? "What was your brother's name?" she asked gently. "Private Michael Foster. He was injured in a mortar attack in January 2021. Lost his leg, but the medic saved his life." Sarah remembered that attack vividly. It was the same one where she had been wounded for the first time. She could still recall the chaos, the smoke, the desperate race to treat as many wounded soldiers as possible before the Taliban mounted another assault. "I remember Michael," she said softly. "How is he doing now?" The private's face lit up. "He's doing great. He's got a prosthetic leg and he's back in college. He wants to be a teacher." His voice broke slightly. "My family, we can never thank you enough for what you did." Sarah felt the familiar mix of pride and discomfort that came with these encounters. "Your brother was incredibly brave that day. He kept joking with me even while I was treating his wounds. That kind of spirit makes a medic's job easier." After the seminar ended, Sarah was approached by dozens of soldiers who wanted to thank her or ask follow-up questions. A senior nurse from the base hospital asked if she would be interested in helping develop new training protocols based on her combat experience. A young lieutenant mentioned that his unit was deploying soon and wondered if Sarah could provide additional training for their medic. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time, a sense of purpose that went beyond simply doing her job. She realized that sharing her knowledge and experience rather than hiding it actually honored the soldiers she had served with and those she hadn't been able to save. Walking back to her barracks that evening, she was joined by Williams, Rodriguez, and the rest of her unit. "That was incredible," Williams said. "I had no idea you could public speak like that." Rodriguez nodded enthusiastically. "You should have seen the faces in that room. Everyone was hanging on every word." "It felt good," Sarah admitted. "I've been so focused on trying to blend in that I forgot there might be value in standing out for the right reasons." Thompson, who had been walking quietly behind the group, caught up to her. "Martinez, I got a call from division headquarters this afternoon. They want to discuss the possibility of you developing a formal combat medic training program. Apparently word about your seminar has already reached some very important people." Sarah felt a flutter of excitement mixed with nervousness. What would that involve? Teaching, developing curriculum, maybe even training instructors at other bases. It would be a significant career opportunity. As they reached the barracks, Sarah looked around at her unit. These people who had become not just her teammates but her friends. The thought of leaving them to take on a new role felt both exciting and terrifying. "I'll need to think about it," she said. "Of course. But Martinez?" Thompson smiled. "Whatever you decide, I want you to know that this unit is better because you're part of it. Not because of your medals or your record, but because of who you are as a soldier and as a person." That night, Sarah lay in her bunk thinking about the unexpected path her life had taken. She had come to Fort Bragg hoping to disappear into anonymity, to be just another soldier in just another unit. Instead, she had found something she hadn't even realized she was looking for. A place where her experience mattered, where her past could help shape a better future for other soldiers. For the first time since returning from Afghanistan, Sarah felt like she knew who she was supposed to be, not the damaged veteran she had feared becoming, not the untouchable hero others wanted her to be, but simply a soldier who had learned valuable lessons and was ready to share them with others who might benefit from her experience. The 5 purple hearts in her footlocker would always be reminders of the price she had paid for that knowledge, but now they felt less like burdens and more like symbols of her responsibility to help ensure that other soldiers could learn from her experiences without having to pay the same price themselves. Private left, Sarah found herself sitting alone, lost in memories she had worked hard to keep buried. She could almost smell the dust and smoke of Fob Chapman, could hear the distant sound of helicopter rotors and artillery fire. Sometimes the past felt more real than the present. Sergeant Thompson found her there an hour later. He had developed an instinct for recognizing when Sarah was struggling with her memories, though she rarely talked about it directly. "You okay, Martinez?" Sarah looked up and nodded. "Just thinking." Thompson sat down beside her. "Want some advice from an old soldier?" "Sure, Sergeant." "The hardest part about having a record like yours isn't the physical scars or even the nightmares. It's learning how to live with the weight of other people's expectations and gratitude. People want heroes, especially in times like these. But heroes are just regular people who did what needed to be done." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes I feel like I'm carrying the stories of everyone I couldn't save along with the ones I could." "Does that make sense?" Thompson nodded. "Perfect sense. The key is learning that you don't have to carry all of that alone. Your unit, your friends, even strangers like that private, they want to help share that weight if you'll let them." That evening, Sarah made a decision that surprised even herself. During the unit's weekly meeting, she volunteered to lead a medical training seminar for newer soldiers on base. It would mean talking about her experiences in more detail than she ever had before, but she realized that her knowledge could help prepare other medics for what they might face in combat. The seminar was scheduled for the following week, and word spread quickly through the base. When the day arrived, Sarah was shocked to find that the lecture hall was packed not just with new medics, but with experienced soldiers, officers, and even some civilian medical staff from the base hospital. Standing at the front of the room, looking out at nearly 200 faces, Sarah felt a moment of panic. But then she saw her unit sitting in the front row, offering encouraging smiles and thumbs up. Williams gave her a small wave, and Rodriguez made an exaggerated calm-down gesture that made her laugh despite her nerves. "My name is Sarah Martinez," she began, her voice growing stronger with each word. 2 years ago, I was a 19-year-old medic deployed to one of the most dangerous bases in Afghanistan. I thought I knew what combat medicine looked like because I had read the manuals and practiced on training dummies. She paused, looking around the room at the attentive faces. I was completely wrong. Nothing can really prepare you for treating a wounded soldier while bullets are flying overhead, or for making life-and-death decisions when you're barely old enough to vote. But there are things I learned over there that might help you if you ever find yourself in similar situations. For the next 2 hours, Sarah shared not just medical techniques but practical wisdom about staying calm under pressure, making quick decisions with limited information, and maintaining hope in seemingly hopeless situations. She talked about the importance of talking to wounded soldiers, not just treating their injuries, and how sometimes a medic's most important tool is simply their presence and reassurance. During the question and answer session, a young medic raised her hand. "Specialist Martinez, how do you deal with the emotional side of losing patients? How do you keep going when you can't save everyone?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, remembering faces of soldiers she hadn't been able to help. You learn that doing your best has to be enough, even when your best isn't sufficient to save someone. Every life you do save makes the losses a little more bearable, and you remember that choosing to become a medic means choosing to run toward danger when others are running away. That choice matters regardless of the outcome. 6 months later, Sarah stood in front of her new office at the Combat Medical Training Center, a building she had helped design from the ground up. The sign on her door read, "Major Sarah Martinez, Director of Advanced Combat Medical Training." The promotion had come through faster than anyone expected, along with the assignment that would define the next phase of her military career. The decision to accept the position hadn't been easy. Leaving her unit at Fort Bragg felt like abandoning the family she had finally found. But Sergeant Thompson, now Sergeant Major Thompson after his own promotion, had put it in perspective during their final conversation. "Martinez, you've spent 2 years learning how to be part of a team again. Now it's time to use what you've learned to help build better teams for everyone else." The training center was Sarah's vision come to life. Unlike traditional medical training facilities that focused on textbook scenarios, this center emphasized realistic combat conditions. The main training hall could simulate everything from desert sandstorms to Arctic conditions, complete with actual gunfire sounds, smoke, and controlled explosions. Her first class of students was a mix of experienced medics preparing for deployment and newer soldiers fresh out of basic medical training. As they filed into the lecture hall on opening day, Sarah recognized the same mixture of confidence and nervousness she had once felt herself. "Welcome to the Advanced Combat Medical Training Program," she began, looking out at the 40 faces before her. "My name is Major Martinez, and I'm going to teach you things that aren't in any manual." She clicked a remote, and the screen behind her displayed a photograph of Fob Chapman as it had looked during her deployment. Dusty, crowded with equipment, and surrounded by mountains that could hide enemy forces. 2.5 years ago, I was sitting where you are now. I thought I knew everything about combat medicine, because I had memorized every procedure and practiced on every piece of equipment. I was completely wrong. Sarah clicked to the next slide, showing a medical kit identical to the ones each student had been issued. "This kit contains everything you need to save lives in combat. But the most important tools aren't in that bag. They're up here," she tapped her temple, "and in here," she placed her hand over her heart. Over the following weeks, Sarah pushed her students harder than they had ever been pushed before. She created scenarios that seemed impossible, treating multiple casualties in a smoke-filled room, while speakers blasted the sounds of combat. Working with limited supplies while instructors shouted contradictory orders, making life-and-death decisions while under time pressure that left no room for hesitation. But she also taught them things that couldn't be found in any manual. How to talk to a wounded soldier who was afraid they were going to die. How to maintain hope when everything seemed hopeless. How to forgive themselves when they couldn't save everyone. One of her students, a young medic named Private Adams who reminded Sarah of herself at that age, stayed after class one day with a question. Major Martinez, how do you know when you're making the right decision? In the field, I mean. When there's no time to think and people are depending on you? Sarah sat on the edge of her desk, remembering asking similar questions when she was Adam's age. The truth is, you don't always know. Sometimes you make the best decision you can with the information you have and it works out. Sometimes it doesn't. But you keep making decisions anyway because not deciding is also a choice. Adams nodded thoughtfully. Were you ever afraid? During your deployments, I mean. Sarah smiled. I was terrified most of the time. But I learned that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what needs to be done despite the fear. As the months passed, Sarah watched her students grow from nervous trainees into confident medics ready for deployment. The program's reputation spread throughout the military medical community, and requests for training slots began coming from bases around the world. But Sarah's proudest moment came when she received a letter from Private Foster, the brother of the soldier she had treated at FOB Chapman. He had enlisted as a medic himself, and was writing to thank her not just for saving his brother's life, but for inspiring him to choose the same path. You probably don't remember me, the letter read, but I was the kid who approached you during a training exercise last year. My brother Michael always said that the medic who saved him changed his entire perspective on what it means to serve others. Now I understand what he meant. I'm about to deploy as a combat medic myself, and I wanted you to know that your example has helped me find my own purpose. Sarah kept that letter in her desk drawer, along with dozens of others from students who had gone on to serve in combat zones around the world. Each one was a reminder that her experiences, painful as they had been, had meaning beyond her own survival. One evening, as she was leaving the training center after a particularly challenging day, Sarah encountered Williams, who was visiting the base as part of her own advanced training program. Look at you, all official with your own building and everything, Williams teased as they walked toward the parking lot. Sarah laughed. It's still weird sometimes. I keep expecting someone to tell me I'm too young for this job. Age is just a number, Williams replied. What matters is experience, and you've got more of that than most people twice your age. They walked in comfortable silence for a while before Williams asked, Do you ever miss it? The simplicity of just being another soldier in the unit? Sarah considered the question carefully. Sometimes. But I think this is what I'm supposed to be doing now. Those 15 months in Afghanistan taught me things that can help other people survive their own deployments. It would be selfish to keep that knowledge to myself. As Williams drove away, Sarah stood in the parking lot looking back at the training center. Through the window, she could see night shift instructors preparing for evening classes. Tomorrow would bring new students, new challenges, and new opportunities to pass on the hard-won wisdom that had cost her so much to acquire. She thought about the young woman who had stepped off the bus at Fort Bragg 2 years earlier, desperate to hide her past and blend into the background. That woman had been carrying the weight of her experiences like a burden, afraid that her scars and memories made her too different from everyone else. Now Sarah understood that those same experiences, properly channeled, could be her greatest contribution to the military and to the soldiers who would follow in her footsteps. The 5 purple hearts in her office safe would always represent the price she had paid for her knowledge. But they also represented her qualification to teach others how to serve with courage, skill, and humanity in the most difficult circumstances imaginable. Sarah Martinez had finally found her place in the military, not as the rookie trying to fit in, not as the decorated hero on a pedestal, but as a teacher, mentor, and leader who could help the next generation of soldiers learn from her experiences without having to pay the same price she had paid to acquire them. The uniform she wore might show her rank and decorations now, but what mattered most was invisible. The knowledge, wisdom, and sense of purpose that had grown from the ashes of her darkest moments into something that could light the way for others.